When 29-year-old Stephanie Sims misses her daily phone call to her parents, they start to worry.
I couldn't sleep that night because I knew that something was wrong. Stephanie would have called me.
Stephanie was the type of person that had contact with her mother every day.
Unable to reach their daughter, Stephanie's parents drive to her apartment the next morning.
The apartment manager let them in, and they looked around, couldn't find her anywhere. Her car is still there, her clothes are still there, her suitcase is there.
I went inside, and, the apartment was clean. Her Bible was laying on the bed.
Everything looked like it would look if Stephanie, had been there, but she just wasn't there.
Stephanie's parents immediately file a missing persons report. Investigators are puzzled. She's not the type to simply vanish.
She was a professor at Louisiana Tech, well respected. She had missed school that morning, and that's never happened.
For weeks, there's no trace of Stephanie Sims. But as the mystery unfolds, investigators uncover one bizarre surprise after another.
This is definitely one of the biggest, most publicized case that I've ever worked.
Investigators hunt for answers after college professor Stephanie Sims suddenly disappears.
We didn't know she'd gone to a friend's house, gone out of town, what had happened. We just didn't know.
We checked buses, taxis, airlines, all modes of travel to see if possibly she may have left via one of those.
A search of Stephanie's apartment yields few clues.
We're looking for anything out of the ordinary, but everything in the apartment was neat.
The doors were checked, the windows were checked, everything was checked.
There was no evidence of any type of a struggle, no evidence of a break-in, so nobody had forced their way into the apartment and gotten her or abducted her or anything like that. There was no illegal drugs, alcohol, nothing. Everything was normal.
Though there are no signs of foul play, investigators treat the apartment like a crime scene.
Detectives went in and sprayed luminol to see if anything bad could have happened there.
Sometimes people try to clean up blood and you may not see it, but the blood's there. Luminol is a chemical that whenever it comes in contact with blood, there's a reaction and the blood stains will glow. And we didn't find any anywhere.
Detectives remove some of Stephanie's personal items.
We decided to go ahead and collect some samples of possible DNA that may still be in the apartment for later use if we needed it.
We took her hairbrush, pillowcases, things like that, something we would be able to get that DNA evidence.
Stephanie's computer is also taken as evidence.
The computer was on and it was still online. So the computer was physically connected to the telephone line, so if you had called the apartment, you would have gotten a busy signal.
It was later recovered and submitted to a crime lab to see if we could get more information from it.
In her bedroom closet, investigators find a box of ammunition.
At the top of her closet, we found this box of cartridges from a small caliber handgun.
But the gun her father had given her is missing.
Howard Pepper said that Stephanie had a small semi-automatic handgun that he had purchased for her several years ago from a pawn shop in Ruston.
She just lived and breathed her work, and she worked too much, and she worked too hard, and I told her that. And I kept trying to think of something that she enjoyed doing other than working. So I said, well, I'll just buy her a little pistol, and she and I can go out and practice, shoot the gun.
Stephanie's car is parked out front. Her books are inside. Outside, the car is unusually dirty.
Like it may be driven down a dirt road or something.
She kept that car spotless, everything. In fact, she was almost a perfectionist.
Looking inside the car, Stephanie's father realizes someone else has been driving it.
When we approached the car, I opened the door, and I looked inside, and I saw that the seat was pushed way back like it is now. And I knew Stephanie always, you could expect the seat to be, 6 to 8 inches from the steering wheel. I knew she hadn't been driving the car, that somebody rather large, tall, had been driving the car.
Investigators search outside of the apartment complex.
Just behind the apartment complex is a wooded area, and we did go through there with canines. We didn't find anything.
Detectives follow up on a phone call the Peppers received after arriving at Stephanie's apartment.
Howard and Barbara Pepper, they said that while they were there at Stephanie's apartment, they received a phone call. Howard answered the phone and spoke to a Wayne Guidry. I said, well, who is Wayne Guidry? And they said, well, this is a guy that she had met and had been seeing.
I said, we're trying to find Stephanie. Wayne, have you seen her? He said, well, I was with her last night. And I said, you were with Stephanie last night? I said, well, she's gone.
Detectives want to talk with Guidry. They alert law enforcement agencies in the surrounding area.
Later that evening, we get a call, hey, we saw this Wayne Guidry coming through town. I stopped him. He's willing to talk to y'all.
He was cooperative. He tried to give us information on what he thought might have happened to her.
Guidry says he's not sure where Stephanie is, maybe with friends. But detectives are baffled. Stephanie's background makes her an unlikely missing person.
She was not your average 29-year-old woman. She was smart and capable and independent and pretty and had the world at her fingertips. She was a star.
She had a beautiful smile. It was brighten up her whole room when she walked in. She was a kind, considerate, and caring person. She had compassion.
I guess you could call her the miracle child. Stephanie was the perfect little girl that sang at church, went to bed on time, did her homework, made good grades. Just a joyful child to be around.
Well, Stephanie was intelligent, she was focused, and she was goal-driven. And when she made her mind up, she set a goal, she was willing to make all the sacrifices necessary to reach that goal.
She had recently moved out on her own, separating from a husband she married young. When word of Stephanie's disappearance reaches the press, investigators issue a brief, non-committal statement.
Initially, the police told the media they didn't have a lot of information. They weren't sure if Stephanie had left on her own. They weren't sure if this was related to the serial killer in Baton Rouge.
Baton Rouge is just 4 hours away. At a university, several young women had recently disappeared.
They were also conducting an investigation of a serial killer down at LSU. Females had come up dead and missing, and some of the press were trying to see if there was a link. Because yes, Stephanie worked at a university, and maybe the guy had moved up here.
That theory sends a chill through the community.
This community where this took place is a small, rural, southern community. And whereas they may have the occasional drug murder, they don't have 30-year-old college professors murdered. Doesn't happen.
Every day, people were calling us, wanting to know what the latest. They wanted to know, had there been an arrest yet? So in turn, we were constantly calling the police, talking to the investigator, trying to find out, is there anything new that we can tell the community, that we can tell the public? Because everyone literally was on pins and needles. They wanted answers. We wanted answers so we could give that to the community. But the police were so concerned about their investigation, and rightfully so.
All of the news agencies were reporting on it, the newspapers, local newspapers, the television stations, going out across the media about this professor that's missing.
Investigators review their case. They have few clues, little to go on. Stephanie's apartment is undisturbed. There's no sign of struggle or abduction. Her car is parked out front. It has apparently been driven by someone else. Stephanie's gun is missing. Stephanie left in a hurry. Her computer and TV were still on.
This sort of thing just doesn't happen here. This is a small town. We're in the Bible Belt. Everyone was just shocked at the beginning. Like, how could someone like Stephanie just vanish?
The public and the media are beginning to demand answers.
This wasn't your average missing persons case. It was a huge thing from the start. I think those of us that were in the media knew this was different.
Detectives know one thing all too well. In a missing persons case, time is your enemy. The day after Stephanie Sims' mysterious disappearance, investigators are pursuing all possible leads. They take a closer look at the separation from her husband.
Miss Sims was separated from her husband, who lived about 30 miles from West Monroe in Ruston, Louisiana.
She had told me that there were financial problems. I guess almost every couple might have financial problems, and he was sort of having a midlife crisis or something, I think, and that's when he couldn't decide what he wanted to do, but he did want to go back to school, so she wasn't happy about that.
There's this estranged husband, so he was, I think, everyone's first suspect.
Detectives contact Stephanie's husband, David Sims. He agrees to talk.
He told us that she wanted to be out on her own for the first time and wanted to see what it was like.
Investigators asked Sims where he was on the day Stephanie went missing.
He was very cooperative and told us right down the line just what they did that day. He saw her.
He'd gotten a call from Stephanie that morning, early, and they made an agreement to go to church together.
When they arrive at the church, the pastor says services have been canceled because of a special function.
They decided to go do a little bit of shopping, stop by a convenience store, got something to drink.
Investigators check out his story.
We got some video that showed David and Stephanie going to Walmart. We went to this convenience store that he said they went to, and sure enough, we could see the car, saw Stephanie come out.
After shopping, they returned to the house where they had lived together.
David said they went back to their mutual home, even though she was living away. Witnesses saw them both together and then saw Stephanie leave.
Shortly after noon, Stephanie headed back to her apartment.
Her last call on her cell phone was in the West Monroe Tower, so we knew she had made it back to West Monroe after that period of time with David Sims.
David Sims tells detectives he remained at home the rest of that afternoon and night.
I wanted to confirm the fact that he was telling me the truth, that he wasn't lying to me about anything.
But there is something David can't tell detectives because he doesn't know the real reason Stephanie moved out.
Ginger Hoover, who was one of Stephanie's best friends. According to Ginger, Stephanie was looking for some excitement.
She goes from living with her parents and being the perfect daughter to living with the almost obsessive-compulsive accountant husband that's older than she is, who handles all the finances and is somewhat of a father figure.
David was very controlling. He had a budget, and she had to give him her check, and I would give her like $20 a week spending money because he had set up all these accounts. She said she thought they needed some time apart.
Then, out one night with Ginger Hoover, Stephanie meets a man at a local bar. It's Wayne Guidry, who police have already questioned.
Stephanie was confronted with this magnetic, charming, engaging, attractive man. Ginger was sitting back thinking, I've heard this load before, but she saw her friend have this glassy look come over her eyes.
Stephanie and this gentleman she met became friends, started going out, and eventually moved in together.
Ginger cautioned Stephanie, this is too quick, this is too soon.
This was sort of new chartered territory for Stephanie. Here she was in this relationship with this man who made her feel good, mentally and physically.
Stephanie attempts to keep the affair secret.
I know that her mother knew about it, maybe one of her friends. Other than that, most of the people that she associated with didn't know.
I had seen Wayne Guidry when I went up to Stephanie's office. You know, he was very polite and courteous, but Howard and I both did tell her that she needed not to rush into anything else, just continue to try to work out her marriage, because we really don't believe in divorce.
We learned that David did, in fact, suspect she was having an affair.
I think he pieced together other things that had happened. A time that she was on the phone and he heard a male voice, found a hat in the trunk of her car.
When David finally realized what was going on, he was crushed.
When he found out that his wife had an affair, that it made him want to vomit.
I think it's clear based on the investigation that David certainly had a motive to commit homicide.
Meanwhile, the media continues to press police for answers.
We were calling the detective every day. We were staying on top of it because people were calling us. They wanted to know.
It's now been 12 days since Stephanie disappeared. Investigators continue checking out every lead.
We did get a lot of calls from various people saying that they maybe had some information, but none of it panned out.
Investigators focus on what they know. Stephanie was seeing another man. Her husband was devastated over the affair. Stephanie and her husband were together on the day she vanished.
We did, you know, try to hang on in there and have a little hope. We had people praying and we were praying, and they organized searches, put out posters.
Detectives turn their attention to David. He agrees to take a lie detector test.
We had two main relevant questions I used on the test. Do you know the whereabouts of Stephanie Sims? Also, did you harm Stephanie Sims in any way?
The tests could indicate whether or not David Sims was involved in his wife's disappearance. But at the same time, police are also chasing down another suspect.
They did tell us that they had a person of interest. They were zeroing in on someone who knew Stephanie.
Someone with a long rap sheet, a history of trouble with women, and some very bad habits.
I stopped counting at approximately close to 5,000 pornographic images.
Police continue to monitor Stephanie Sims' estranged husband about her disappearance. But as they dig deeper into their investigation, they turn their focus to another person of interest, Stephanie's boyfriend, Wayne Guidry.
He said they hit it off immediately.
Detectives question Guidry a second time. He tells them the story of how he met Stephanie.
Stephanie and Ginger are out together at a bar, and Wayne Guidry comes up, gets Stephanie's attention right away.
Wayne was immediately attracted to Stephanie, told both the girls that he was a golf pro.
1 week after meeting Wayne, Stephanie moves out and finds an apartment in West Monroe. Before long, Guidry moves in.
I think when Stephanie and Wayne met, she was swept away. She trusted him, believed him for whatever reason, allowed him to live with her.
Investigators ask Guidry about the day Stephanie disappeared.
Guidry tells us that that morning she calls David Sims. She drives to Russin to meet him to go to church. That afternoon, she drives home. Later that night, he tells us that they get into this big argument about going home to Luling to take care of some business. She eventually kicks him out of the house at about midnight.
Alone outside on a cold January night, Guidry says he took refuge inside her car.
He tried calling her all night. She would never answer the phone.
He said he called her repeatedly throughout the night, from his cell phone to her home phone there in the apartment, never did get her. He drove her around West Monroe till that morning and then goes to the bank to cash a check.
Detectives ask about the check.
He says, well, she gave me this $3,000 check so I could get my vehicle repaired down in Lulee.
To detectives, Guidry's story is beginning to sound shaky.
Stephanie did not come from the kind of background where she's just going to toss money around and give somebody $3,000.
Guidry says he went and cashed the check. Later, when he returned to the apartment, Stephanie still wouldn't see him or speak to him.
He doesn't have any vehicle, so he's trying to think of a way to get back home, and the only thing he can think of is to rent a U-Haul truck.
Guidry walks a mile to the U-Haul dealer, rents a truck, and heads home to southern Louisiana.
According to him, that was the last time he saw Stephanie.
With the interview over, police consider their suspects. The first possibility, the serial killer in Baton Rouge, has been eliminated.
The only thing that matched between the two that were similar was she was tied to the university.
Stephanie's husband, David Sims, has also been cleared. The lie detector test confirmed he was telling the truth.
I never thought that David did it.
Investigators zero in on Wayne Guidry. Certain aspects of his story, like his calling Stephanie the night she disappeared, don't check out.
One of the first things that we did was subpoenaed phone records. We knew that he didn't call Stephanie's apartment that night, like he said. So we knew that Wayne is lying about that.
Then, detectives get the results from the computer forensic experts. The contents of Stephanie's computer are startling.
There was no porn, no golf on Stephanie Sims' computer in 3 years that she's owned the computer.
But things changed dramatically after she met Wayne Guidry.
Beginning of December of 2002, Wayne Guidry and Stephanie Sims moved in together. Starting about December 5th, the visits to pornography and golf websites started to appear. I stopped counting at approximately close to 5,000 pornographic images. She didn't just coincidentally develop an interest in porn or golf.
Stephanie's computer also reveals online purchases using Stephanie's credit card.
Guidry was making purchases after Stephanie went missing. He was using her credit card to buy memberships to some websites.
And it wasn't just porn websites.
Somebody used Stephanie's Discover card to purchase several $1,000s worth of golf equipment and have it shipped to guess who? Wayne Guidry.
The purchases were made on the very same night Stephanie vanished.
That directly contradicted his story about not being in the apartment and Stephanie being there and not letting him in.
The day that she went missing was just a wonderful textbook example of computer forensics being able to tell you what Guidry was doing all day long, except for that 5-hour period in the afternoon. The rest of the day, I knew he was at the apartment.
Investigators decide to question Guidry again.
He tells us a little bit different story. And mainly everything is the same up until you get to about midnight on the 5th.
Then Guidry adds a startling new detail.
He mentioned to us that Stephanie had tried to commit suicide. He's sitting in the living room watching a movie, the lights go out and come back on.
He went into the bathroom. Stephanie was standing nude in the bathtub with a hairdryer in her hand. She said, "Oh, it must not have worked."
Detectives consider whether Stephanie might have taken her own life.
We looked into whether or not she was suicidal. I mean, you never rule anything out.
Stephanie's father tells detectives his daughter would never kill herself.
I had a lot of reservations. You know, I knew it wasn't Stephanie because I knew she never had been suicidal, and I just didn't believe it.
And as an electrician, he tells detectives Guidry's story doesn't make any sense.
I knew that all bathrooms required by code to have a GFCI, a ground fault interrupt circuit, protected. Throwing the hairdryer into the tub wouldn't have worked. Neither would have thrown the breaker.
He knew if a hairdryer was dropped into a bathtub, lights wouldn't flicker. Howard himself went into the bathroom and plugged the hairdryer in. It wouldn't even reach the bathtub.
That gets you thinking, why would he want us to think that she's trying to commit suicide when the story he's telling us is obviously a lie?
Guidry is questioned about the missing gun.
Wade said, yeah, she's got a handgun, and we've actually gone and shot this handgun. Him and Stephanie one time went to the Jackson Bienville Game Reserve near an old church and did some target practicing.
Detectives ask Guidry where the gun is.
Wayne told the police that the last time he saw the gun was in the side compartment on the car.
He's admitting to us that he knows there's a gun, that he shot the gun before, that it was in the car with him while he's doing all this driving around. Now that really piqued our interest.
That was enough about the gun to indicate to the police that there's even more at stake here than perhaps we had thought.
Guidry's background is checked for previous criminal activity.
He had been in trouble just a couple of times, and that had to do with an ex-girlfriend that he had a child with. But nothing really serious, never any types of violent crime before, like murder.
He was sort of the black sheep of the Guidry family. He was a ne'er-do-well. Father had kicked him out of the house. He was in his 30s. He'd never held a steady job, had a problem with telling the truth.
Investigators now consider Wayne Guidry their lead suspect, but the evidence against him is all circumstantial.
We have some pretty good suspicions that he knows something that he's not telling us. So we wanted to follow him. We wanted to know everywhere he went.
Detectives obtain a court order allowing them to place a GPS tracking device on Guidry's car, unknown to Guidry.
We wanted to know if he did do something to Stephanie. Is he going to go back to the body? If he thinks we're on to him, is he going to try to hide her somewhere else?
Over the next 4 weeks, Guidry's every move is monitored by computer.
We saw a pattern there of places that he was going. He was going to golf courses. It was obvious that he wasn't out searching for Stephanie.
Investigators review their case. They have no body and no direct evidence. They do have a $3,000 check written by Stephanie and cashed by Wayne Guidry the day after she disappeared. Thousands of dollars of items purchased online by Wayne using Stephanie's credit cards. The purchases were made the night she disappeared. Phone records proving Wayne lied about calling Stephanie's apartment from the car.
At this point, we still don't have any idea where she's at. We were at Guidry pretty hard to tell us the truth about what happened.
He knew that there was no direct evidence that he committed a homicide. He knew that there was no forensic evidence linking him to a homicide.
Frustrated detectives need something more.
At this point, we're kind of running into a bunch of dead ends. We're not getting anywhere. It's rocking on now close to a month. Still haven't heard anything from her. The case has been all over the local news, so everybody knows she's missing, and we still haven't heard anything.
Investigators review what suspect Wayne Guidry has told them.
He's been coming up here to the Jackson area all of his life hunting. He knew every tree out there. If he had done something to Stephanie and killed her, more than likely he's going to hide her body somewhere that he knows. And we knew that the Jackson Bienville Game Reserve was the area that he knew best.
The game reserve is over 60,000 acres of thick brush and trees. Detectives want to search it, but they don't know where to start.
I suggested we need to contact his family, and they lived in South Louisiana at the time, Luling, Louisiana.
Detectives visit the suspect's father, Wayne Guidry Sr.
Come to find out, Stephanie and Wayne had come down over the Thanksgiving holidays, and she had actually met Mr. Guidry and his wife.
Wayne's father knows Stephanie has disappeared under mysterious circumstances. He's anxious to help.
We're about ready to conclude the interview, and I break out a map of the Jackson-Bienville Game Reserve. And I tell Mr. Guidry, if your son had killed her and hid her body somewhere in this game reserve here, do you have any idea where he would hide her body? Well, it's like a light goes off in Mr. Guidry's head, and he says, over a year ago, I remember Wayne telling me about this hole that he found out in the middle of the woods.
It's exactly what detectives have been looking for, the missing piece of the puzzle.
He draws an X on the spot where this hole is about, and it's between an old dirt road and a lake out in the middle of this game reserve. We get back in our car, and we look at each other and we say, you know, this is looking really good.
Armed with the crude map, investigators organize a massive search.
We decided to do a line search where you have officers in a straight line, basically arm length apart, so we can pinpoint specific locations for teams.
We don't want civilian volunteers, because if we do find something, I want it to be a trained police officer that knows how to protect the crime scene.
The dense brush presents a serious challenge.
The area that we were specifically wanting to look at is what they call piney woods, pine trees, thick underbrush, some hardwoods. Pretty difficult to walk through. A lot of vines growing, small trees.
The first search comes up empty. Investigators go out again.
Within 1 hour, they find the hole. And it's the last guy on the line that finds it.
The hole, which was about 8 to 10 foot deep, it looked like an old well site that had caved in.
We couldn't find a single person that had lived that area their entire life that knew about this hole in this particular area.
At the bottom of the hole is a woman's corpse.
Her body appeared to be in very, very good condition because of the depth of the hole, it being cooler than it was at the surface. There were not any types of animals that were able to get to her body.
She was relatively well preserved. If this had happened during the summer, it would have been far more decomposition.
Detectives are certain they found Stephanie Sims.
She had been thrown down in the hole because she's on her stomach, and one of her legs is back behind her, like she just fell into the hole. You couldn't tell what had happened to her at that point because she was face down.
Police seal off the sobering crime scene.
In a situation like that, you're going to look at the surrounding area because you want to get any evidence, whether it be a gun or knife or whatever possible weapon.
No weapon is found at the crime scene. Investigators climb down to take a closer look at the body.
You're going to have to get down that hole with that body, and you're going to collect any evidence that might be in or around that body, especially the DNA. You could do some swabs with your sterile gauze and Q-tips.
The body is moved and taken to a team of forensic pathologists for examination.
The official cause of death was trauma due to a gunshot wound to the chest. She bled to death. It took 2 to 3 minutes for her to die. Stephanie definitely saw it coming. This was a well-placed shot to kill her. She had post-mortem striations on her back, which clearly indicated her body was dragged by the feet through the woods and thrown into the hole. And that's how her fingernail got broken off, just got lodged on her clothing. We knew it was Stephanie's because the blood showed it was hers.
Though they have feared the worst, Stephanie's parents are still overcome with grief.
Even though I knew she was dead, it was still such a shock to me. And it was like I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't think, I couldn't do anything. It was just horrible, horrible. I don't know, it was just the most terrible day of my life.
My first reaction was anger. I mean, I was just, and, you know, and I guess that's the only time I ever got mad about it. I just...
With the discovery of Stephanie's body, investigators moved quickly to arrest Wayne Guidry for murder.
Wayne Guidry was at a golf course in New Orleans at the bar, and apparently he had gotten a phone call from a friend of his, and this friend told him they found her body, they've got a warrant for your arrest. Wayne apparently made some admissions to this bartender, there's a warrant out for my arrest. So he calls the New Orleans Police Department.
New Orleans police arrest Guidry at the golf course bar.
We drive down there to interview Wayne. I'm holding some photographs in my hand, and he covers his face with his hat. His eyes remain closed throughout the entire interview. He knew that we had found her body, and that these are probably pictures of her, and he doesn't want to see them.
Despite the suspect's reaction to the photos, he admits nothing.
At the end of the interview, Detective Lucas says, "Remember the last time we talked to you, what did we tell you?" He said, "Y'all told me you'd be arresting me for murder." And that's what happened.
Wayne Guidry is brought back to West Monroe to stand trial for Stephanie's murder.
I knew it had to be him because there was no one else that, she was involved with. Wayne Guidry had to be the one who murdered Stephanie.
I mean, it was a big emotional release. We didn't think we'd ever find her because, we had so little to go on, and we didn't have any physical evidence. The only thing we could really prove was Wayne's lying to us about his actions that night, but we couldn't prove that he killed her.
If Stephanie's body had never been discovered, we're not going to trial.
In the opening moments of the Wayne Guidry trial, the prosecutor is passed a handwritten note. It's from Guidry's cellmate, a man named Terry Coleman. He says Guidry admitted killing Stephanie Sims.
What Terry Coleman had to say were details so specific about the homicide that they either had to come from the mouth of Wayne Guidry himself or Terry Coleman had to have committed the homicide.
But Coleman has a long history of mental instability. His credibility is widely doubted.
I don't think anyone really believed the jailhouse snitch. I mean, how could you? How could you believe someone who has been determined? It's been determined in the court system that he is mentally incompetent to stand trial. That is someone who is crazy, absolutely crazy.
Then the defense asks for and is granted a change of venue.
The defense felt that the jurors from down in Jackson Parish would be prejudicial against his client.
The trial is moved to the small town of Homer, Louisiana. As jury selection begins inside a courtroom built during the Civil War, the national media looks on.
This was a huge case, but the police, the district attorney, all of the prosecutors, they were very tight-lipped, and they were not going to risk their case by giving information to the media prematurely.
Finally, the jury hears a step-by-step account of the day Stephanie Sims was murdered.
About mid-afternoon, about 12 o'clock, where she gets up, goes to Ruston, she spends some time with David, goes to a couple of stores, comes back home.
Prosecutors believe it was that afternoon in her apartment when Guidry forced Stephanie to write him the $3,000 check.
She changes clothes into some blue jeans and a shirt, her hiking boots. They get in the car, they drive to Jonesboro and to go to the Jackson Game Reserve.
They went in Stephanie's car with Guidry driving. Investigators say that explains both the dirt on the car and the pushed-back position of the driver's seat.
Wayne presented Stephanie with his proposal, and that is, you need to get rid of David and stick with me. If you're not, you ain't walking out of here. And she said, I'm going back with David.
He apparently gets upset, shoots her one time in the chest. He shoots her with her own pistol, small caliber semi-automatic handgun. At that point, he drags her through the woods and dumps her body in this hole.
Stephanie's gun was never found.
I think he knew when they left the house that she was either going to come back with the agreement that they were going to take off, or he was coming back without her.
Prosecutors say Wayne Guidry's motive was clear.
The most instructive thing that Wayne Guidry said in the 3 statements that he made to the police, there was one sentence, and in that one sentence he provided the motive. He said, "I wanted what David and Stephanie had." And when he realized that wasn't going to happen, that was enough for him to commit a murder.
Wayne's internet activities are spelt out to the jury.
The computer evidence was probably the key evidence in proving that Wayne Guidry lied about what took place the afternoon and evening that we believe Stephanie disappeared.
The trial lasts 10 days. Then, after just 2.5 hours of deliberations, the jury returns its verdict: guilty.
You know, there's no pause or anything. She just reads it. "We, the jury, find the defendant Wayne Guidry guilty of second-degree murder."
Second-degree murder in Louisiana is killing another person when the offender has the intent to kill, and it is not otherwise legally justified.
We all knew that there couldn't have been any other conclusion.
The investigators did such a good job with all, even though, you know, it was circumstantial evidence, they did such a good job that I don't think there was, you know, really any way he could have gotten off.
I immediately turned around and looked at Howard and Barbara, and it just tore my heart apart because they just were leaning on each other, crying.
For the investigators, it was the case of a lifetime.
I don't know that any other case has given me as much satisfaction.
Yes, it was one of the major cases that I had been involved in.
Wayne Guidry Jr. is now serving a life sentence for the murder of Stephanie Sims.
He's been convicted of murder and still maintains his innocence and says he doesn't know who killed Stephanie.
If I'm to hold any kind of resentment against someone else because I'm in jail for something they did, what kind of expression or what kind of faith would I be demonstrating as towards Jesus Christ?
Wayne killed Stephanie, and he is spending the rest of his life in prison for killing Stephanie.
The wonderful thing about this is that they sentenced me to a life of service there among all these other people whose sins have, or whose crimes have been exposed to the world.
When Guidry's appeals are denied, Stephanie's parents say they will finally move on with a small sense of solace.
I was just so glad it was over, and I just felt such a relief. It was just like a weight had been lifted from me, and I was just elated that he, you know, was found guilty and that maybe he wouldn't ever have the opportunity to prey on anyone else.
It gave us the kind of closure we needed. I think if we'd never found Stephanie's body and they'd never brought him to justice, that she would have died, and it would indeed been a tragedy, her death. But at least that's one thing we can say, that she was instrumental in getting the guy off the street.